The Miami Dolphins defense began the season as if it had forgotten what its own identity was supposed to look like. 3 straight games giving up 30 points. 3. And then 27 to the Panthers, 29 to the Chargers. And the uneasy feeling that something deeper than a rough week was happening. You could sense the frustration building around the team because nothing looked stable. Nothing looked coordinated. And nothing looked like it belonged to a defense that had spent the entire offseason talking about effort, structure, and discipline. It got so strange that the Dolphins didn't even force a single punt until the second half of Week 3 against Buffalo. That moment alone felt like a sign of how messy everything had become. But then something shifted, quietly at first, then a little louder. Then suddenly you start looking at the past 4 games and realize the entire narrative has been bending in a new direction. The performance in Week 10 against the Bills felt like the first real moment where the unit stood there and said, "This is the version we should have been from the beginning. Not perfect, not pretty, not overwhelming, but finally connected." The numbers began reflecting it too, with the defense producing positive EPA in 3 of its last 4 matchups after 6 games of negative results that made the early season look like a slow disaster. That begs the question everyone is trying to answer. What exactly changed? Was it one thing? Was it 5? Was it simply time? Or was it a combination of everything that had been building underneath the early chaos? If you look closely, 5 areas reveal much of what's been reshaped. And once you start noticing them, the entire arc of the season begins to make more sense. You start seeing why the defense suddenly feels functional, why the communication improved, why the energy looks different, why the team isn't collapsing on simple plays anymore, and why, even with flaws still sitting in plain view, the Dolphins are far from that unstable unit from September. The first noticeable shift came from something simple, turnovers. Or better yet, the total lack of them. 3 weeks. Not a single one. How could a defense survive without taking the ball away even once over that stretch? The answer was clear. It couldn't. Miami entered Week 4 against the Jets knowing that something had to change, and instead of waiting for luck to appear out of nowhere, the defense began attacking the ball with intention. They went after the football like it had insulted them. Punches, strips, attempts that sometimes created messy tackles, but finally produced results. 8 forced fumbles since Week 3, 7 recoveries, and not empty-calorie turnovers, but ones that stopped drives that looked ready to cause serious damage. 2 against Buffalo at critical moments, 1 right near the Jets' goal line, and a handful of others that shifted momentum just enough to give Miami's offense breathing room. And the wildest part? The defense still has only 2 interceptions all season. Imagine how different things would look if they managed more. But even without that, the renewed focus on the ball changed everything. It became the one reliable trait in a defense that had spent weeks trying to figure out what it was supposed to be. Then, of course, there's the run defense, the early season headache that refused to go away. It felt like every opposing running back had a lane the size of an airport runway. The Dolphins weren't just struggling, they looked overwhelmed. But slowly the unit went from unable to stop anything to making running backs actually work for their yards. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, but it was enough to bring balance to games that had previously been tilted the second the ball was handed off. When you start seeing yards before contact numbers basically scraping the floor, 0.03, 1.12, 1.26, 1.18, you realize something clicked. Those were some of the lowest marks of the season, and it meant Miami was at least arriving early enough to prevent easy chunk plays. The problem is that tackling still feels unreliable, especially against teams like the Ravens and the Browns, where early penetration didn't translate into actual stops. But the foundation is being built, and if the tackling ever becomes steady instead of streaky, the defense could jump another level. Another quiet but crucial shift has been the improvement in zone coverage spacing. This isn't something you can point to on a stats sheet and feel satisfied. It's something you see in how the secondary moves, how it reacts, how it floats within the structure instead of drifting lost in open space. Early on, players were stepping out of zones, misreading routes, and creating windows so wide that opposing quarterbacks barely had to think. That confusion led to breakdown after breakdown. But now, With weeks of experience together, the secondary looks much more unified. Against Buffalo in Week 10, every time the Bills pulled off a big pass, it came against man coverage or some improbable scramble from Josh Allen. That alone tells you how much the zone communication has tightened. Considering that Jack Jones, Rasul Douglas, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Ashton Davis, and Dante Trader Jr. had never shared real game time before this season, the early miscommunication was almost guaranteed. Now they're finally learning each other's tendencies. And then you get to the rookies, the beating heart of this shift. A group thrown into major roles before they had a chance to breathe. Kenneth Grant, Jordan Phillips, Dante Trader Jr., and Jason Marshall Jr. stacking 902 combined snaps before the season even hit its midpoint. That workload usually leads to chaos, mistakes, desperation, but something unexpected happened. Growth. Grant spent the first few weeks struggling to find any sort of rhythm, especially against the run, but now he looks like a player who understands how to anchor. Trader had his low moments, including that rough missed tackle against the Chargers, but over the last 3 games he's been steady. Phillips, who spent weeks stacking blockers without winning, suddenly started shedding them against Buffalo. And Marshall has slowly found comfort in his assignments. These rookies raise the floor of the defense. The unit no longer collapses when one of them makes a mistake. If they keep developing, the ceiling rises too. Coverage disguise also deserves its spotlight. It wasn't a season-long improvement. It was something that hit hard specifically in that game against Buffalo. Miami confused Josh Allen with post-snap rotations, unusual fronts, and unpredictable safety movement. Anthony Weaver, who had relied heavily on simulated pressures early in the year without much success, started shifting toward more creative safety usage, rotating into 2 high looks after the snap, showing man then dropping into zone, taking away Allen's comfort reads. It felt like the first time all season that Weaver's adjustments truly disrupted a high-level quarterback. Will that continue? That's the real test. But even with the improvements, this defense is far from complete. 19th in pressure rate, 21st in sacks. Those numbers don't scream dominance. They barely whisper competence. Miami harassed Allen in Week 10, but isolated performances don't build trends. If the team wants to climb out of the bottom half of the league, the front needs to generate pressure consistently, not in occasional bursts. The path ahead helps, though. The next stretch brings the Commanders, Jets, and Saints, offenses that have their own issues, sometimes bigger than Miami's. Then comes Pittsburgh, a team that hasn't been able to figure out its identity at all. A team that struggles to run, struggles to connect through the air, and leans heavily on occasional flashes. That's followed by 3 closing tests that will define how far this defense has come. The Bengals, Buccaneers, and Patriots. Each offense brings different challenges. Each can move the ball when given space. Each will punish sloppy communication or weak tackling. So what happens now? Does this defensive turnaround keep building? Does it stall? Does it grow into something real or fade back into the inconsistency of early September? The opportunity is right there. The improvement is undeniable, even if incomplete. And while nobody knows how this season's final chapters will unfold, the defense has finally placed itself in the conversation. After weeks of confusion, missed assignments, and breakdowns, we're finally seeing signs of a unit that can be trusted, or at least trusted more than before. The question hanging in the air is simple. Is this just a brief rise, or the true beginning of the defense Miami expected all along?